Hi there, everybody. Welcome to APES Chapter 21, Lecture Part 1. Let's begin. This is the chapter on what's called the new renewable energy alternatives. Some of you may not think they're really that new because they've been around for your lifetime, but they're relatively new when you compare them to the nuclear power and you compare them to the other hydropower and those other types of energy. Okay, so let's begin. The beginning of the chapter, we're going to focus on the central case here in Germany. Why are we looking at Germany as a central case? Well, Germany has created programs that have really pushed their country towards renewable energy. One of the things they're into doing is they created what's called a feed-in tariff system. This happened, I believe, about 2010 is really when the push really began just before 2010. What did people start doing? Let me explain to you what a feed-in tariff system. Here's what it is: a tariff is a cost or fee. Feed-in means Germans were feeding electricity into the power grid that everyone uses. How are they feeding electricity in the power grid? They were buying solar panels, for example. They're putting solar shingles on their rooftops, like this is showing you here. So they're putting solar panels in on their rooftops. They were creating so much extra solar power that they were feeding into the grid. This tariff system, feed-in tariff system, pays people for the excess energy that they produce, and they pay you a nice fee. The government kind of adds money to it, the government subsidizes and puts money into it, and by doing that, the cost that they were paying people was high, so people were overproducing quite a bit because they were making money on their homes' rooftops, basically. So by putting solar panels in, they were able to make some cash. So their electricity was free, plus they were getting paid. This was a big deal. They've been shifting towards renewable energy for a long time. And the reason I said 2010 earlier, that's when they really had a boom in their industry towards purchasing of solar panels because people knew the tariff system or the plan or the fee that they were paying them was going to decrease. So people wanted to lock in the better prices. So they had a huge boom. When everyone's buying solar panels, that brings the cost of solar panels down too. So it kind of helped them in that respect. By doing this, they reduced their greenhouse gas emissions by a lot, basically. Um, New renewable sources. The new renewable sources are not nuclear. Nuclear was our last chapter, not fossil fuels. New renewable sources are going to be what we call the solar and the geothermal and the wind power and the ocean, the tidal power and all that. So the new renewable sources, they're growing fast. Which one is growing the fastest? PV, photovoltaic solar. This is where you put panels on your roof and you generate electricity from those panels. In the past, the fastest growing sector was wind power, but in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a boom in the PV solar sector. Concentrated solar power, we're going to talk about that when we get there. I got to show you pictures, and you've probably seen it if you've taken road trips around the country. Here's what's going on with these new renewables. What are the benefits of these new renewable sources? What are the benefits? Well, they reduce air pollution. That's a big one. Fossil fuel production or fossil fuels to produce electricity, power our cars, really big air pollutants. Also, emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. These new renewables don't emit greenhouse gases. Also, when all the energy in an economy comes from fossil fuels, you're kind of putting all your eggs in one basket and you're not diversifying your economy. So, by having different sectors of energy, you will diversify your economy. It's very good to have a mix of energy sources to drive your economy. What are they saying is happening? There's a lot of jobs now that are going into design and installation, like these solar panel. A lot of electrician jobs right now, especially here in San Diego, because we have a lot of sun, so people are putting in a lot of solar panels. So all these electricians are getting these green collar jobs associated with putting in solar panels. It's a big, big business, especially, like I said, where we live. So what's happening? Well, the title here says policy and investment can accelerate our transition from fossil fuels. The government can do things to help push energy towards these new renewables or renewables in general. If and the government can also do things that'll shift energy usage towards fossil fuels. What has happened? Well, the price for these renewables has been generally higher than the cost of fossil fuels. And why is that? Well, that's because the government has been subsidizing these fossil fuels for a long time. So they've brought their costs down, and it's not unnaturally. So the government has subsidized the fossil fuel industry for a long time. So because of that, renewable energy, like these new renewables, they're more expensive, but it has a lot to do with the government. Government can invest in technology that can make these new renewables better and cheaper, but they haven't for quite a long time. So the ideal thing is to have your government involved in it. They can make renewable energy cheaper and easier to access for everybody. So what would support renewable energy? Feed-in tariffs, what Germany is doing, for example. All right. Governments can set rules and mandates where you can only, use so much power, or so much power has to come from renewable sources. I mentioned to you a second ago, government can R&D, research and development. Government can invest in that. If you're going to do a renewable energy startup business, there's lending programs in place. Tax credits and rebates are huge, huge things. Government can basically subsidize it, which put money towards it. Governments have subsidized fossil fuels and nuclear power way more than renewable energy. There are some subsidies, yes, for renewable energy switching. For example, if you buy electric cars, there's programs in place. If you put solar panels on your house, there are programs in place currently. They may be running out, I believe, or they may have just ran out in 2021, or by 2022. They may be reinstated, depends on what's happening. A lot of it has to do with government and who's in power on which type of programs they want in place. Under a Republican, generally, you're going to lose a lot of the subsidies towards renewable energy when there are Republicans in charge, and when the Democrats in charge, you're going to be gaining subsidies towards renewable energy. So let's begin about this is our first major kind of new renewable. It's called solar energy. You've all heard about it. Energy from the sun, basically. It can be harnessed. Generally, it's harnessed in a similar way, but we can use it to heat things, or we can use it to directly make electricity in what's called photovoltaic cells. Each day, this is an interesting statistics, each day we have enough solar energy striking the earth to power human consumption for 25 years. There's a lot of energy hitting us that's coming from the sun. A typical home, all right, your home has plenty of rooftop space. A typical home, the average home, has enough rooftop space for panels to supply their home with all their energy needs from solar. And this is even in places where they don't get necessarily a lot of sun. All right. In San Diego, a typical roof in San Diego, if you actually filled your entire roof and all your shingles became solar panels, you would overproduce. For surely you would be overproducing here in San Diego. So in other places, a typical rooftop can supply their needs for the entire year. The big thing is trying to make this whole process. Solar power needs to be cost effective. Generally, there's an upfront cost sometimes. Sometimes there isn't, depending on the programs that are in place. But a lot of people don't want to pay upfront for the solar costs. Now, there's different ways of collecting solar energy. There's passive and active. So this is called passive. This picture is showing you passive, and I'll explain to you what this means. All right. This picture is showing you an area designed in a way so that it is passively solar energy collecting, and it is energy efficient and is using passive solar energy collection. What does that mean? Well, it's made out of materials, thermal mass. Certain materials absorb and store and release heat slowly. That is good. Okay, that means they have a high heat capacity. So certain things with a high heat capacity, they don't get hot too quick. They don't get cold too quick either. So that's what it means when they absorb, store, and release heat. So they don't change temperature very quickly. For example, if this was made out of stone, stone has a low heat capacity. It would get very hot when the sun hit it, making this area extremely warm. Okay, so its thermal mass is poor. All right, stones also, when it got cold at night, the sun went down, stones would get very cold very quickly, making this area chilly at night. So big stones are poor. They would not be a thermal mass. They would not be considered thermal mass. They do not hold heat very well. And that's because stone, like rocks or tile, for example, would get very cold and very hot if sun hits it, very hot, very cold as the sun didn't hit it. So it would be a poor design in an outdoor area to maximize your solar energy needs, basically. Ideally, here in the United States, since we're in the northern hemisphere, you want your windows facing south. Why? If your window's facing south, and remember, we're in the northern hemisphere, so the sun is south of us most of the year. All right. Why is it south of us most of the year? Because we are in the northern hemisphere. So when your windows face south, they will have more sun exposure throughout the year. Why is that good? You can capture sunlight. And in the winter, especially when the sun is in the south, our sun, if you look at it in the wintertime, it's in the south in the sky. In the wintertime, you can take advantage of your windows facing south. So they would be collecting south-facing windows, would be collecting sunlight, and you can heat your house with the direct sunlight, basically. And that would save you from needing more energy. In the summertime, you can use overhangs to shade them, and then that would cool them in the summer. So this is being passive. You're not actually turning it into electricity. You're just doing it smart. All right. So the south facing. Ideally, if you have solar panels on your house here in the United States, because we're in the northern hemisphere, you want your solar panels facing south if you could. Your home may not have a rooftop that faces south, so you may not be able to have them. They may not necessarily be on your rooftop facing south, but as close to south as you can. For example, my rooftop, we do not have them facing south because of the way my roof line on my solar panels on my roof is structured. So on mine, they're facing towards the west, southwest-ish, sort of. Okay, that was the best I could do. So ideally, solar panels facing south, windows facing south. When you construct homes, that is doing it correctly. And then you build them out of materials called thermal mass that don't change heat very much. They don't get too cold, they don't get too hot. So they would maintain a nice, relatively average temperature in that area. Putting vegetation, plants around your house, that also buffers your house from extreme temperatures. It basically seems it's like it keeps your house from getting too hot and too cold. Vegetation does that also. Active solar energy, now this is different. This is where you're using a device where it can focus, move, or store solar energy in some way, shape, or form. So what do people do? Well, here in the US, you probably notice people have these black flat plate solar collectors on their rooftops. And here in the US, most people are using these most people are using these for heating their pools. Okay, what is inside of them? Well, water gets pumped through there, and as the water or air could, if you're trying to cool the air, that's not common. Or antifreeze would be a liquid that doesn't get too cold or too hot. You can't boil it. They pump water through there in the United States. Here's what we do with our pools, and it goes up, and then it gets cooled in this. It gets, heated up, very warm, and you can heat up your pools this way. It saves you from having to use gas or electricity to heat the water that you want to heat your pool with. These are flat plate solar collectors. In other parts of the world, they use this to heat their water, basically heat their homes, you name it. Okay, but here in the U.S., primarily used in swimming pools. You'll see these now on rooftops. They sit real flat on the rooftops compared to a typical photovoltaic solar panel that's creating electricity. Concentrated solar power. Now, what you do here is you're dealing with mirrors. And mirrors are reflecting light, and they reflect light towards a certain source. The most common method is this curved reflector one. We're going to talk about these in a second. What they do is they're these curved reflectors, and they have a pipe that runs down the middle. The sun hits all these curved mirrors. They reflect their light back onto that central area, and in that central area you can have water or oil or something that you're heating up, and that gets warm enough, it boils, and then it can turn to steam, and that steam can spin a turbine and create electricity. Have you ever heard of what's called a solar cooker? I'll show you one in a second. Solar cookers are these roundish objects, and then they reflect all the light to a central location, and then they can heat up like a pot, and they can cook food. I'll show you a picture in a second. Another situation, you have a bunch of mirrors curving towards a central area. You're trying to heat that central area. If you ever take a road trip and you drive to, say, through the 15 freeway, like on the way to Las Vegas, you're driving out in the desert, you'll look over to, I believe, you're driving on the north on the 15. It's west of the 15. You'll see what, from a distance, what looks like a mirage of water in the horizon, and you're not seeing water. When you get close, you're seeing a lot of mirrors reflecting towards a central power tower. And if you look at that central tower, it's super bright because all this light is hitting that power tower. And I'm going to show you that in a second. That's what they're doing right now in that desert. They're creating electricity for Las Vegas. So here's a solar cooker. They're concentrating all the light towards a central location, heating, in this case, a pot and cooking. A parabolic trough. This is the most common method that's used in these types. There's more of these out there. This is the dominant technology currently being used right now, parabolic trough method. Power tower facilities, this looks kind of like the one out in the middle of the desert. You got a bunch of mirrors and they're reflecting light on that central tower. That central tower is collecting that heat, boiling water, creating steam and spinning turbines and creating electricity. Once again, the whole goal here is to get things hot enough to boil water, create steam. That steam spins a turbine, and the turbine then moves magnets around copper in a generator, creating the electricity. So this thing right here is going to be heating that fluid or that oil in that central area, and that same thing that is going to be used to heat up water, turning into the steam, and once again spinning a turbine and using a generator. So it's just basically the whole goal here is to, in this case, is to generate heat. This is to cook, and these two, it's to create electricity in generators. Photovoltaic or PV cells is how they're called. What are they? These are solar panels. This right here is a picture of a solar farm. Valhalla, if you've ever noticed, we have quite a few solar panels in our parking lot. We are a solar farm for San Diego Gas and Electric. We pay them a fee every month for our electricity. It's a flat fee. It does not go up. I believe we have a contract for 10 or 20 years. So we pay them a flat fee every month for our electricity, but Valhalla produces more than we actually use. It was a deal we did with San Diego Gas and Electric. Why did Valhalla do it? Because we did not want our electric bill to continue to keep going up every year. So we locked in an electric bill, and now SDG&E is using Valhalla as a solar farm, and we are making electricity probably for the grid in that entire area. That's what's happening currently. Valhalla, are we getting the good or bad end of that stick? It depends on how you look at it. We would have had to pay for those solar panels, and they would have been very expensive. It would have been a huge upfront cost. So Valhalla did not pay an upfront cost. San Diego Gas and Electric paid to put those panels on our campus. They paid for all of it. They covered the costs. What did they get out of it? Well, Valhalla still pays them. We pay them for electricity. We don't get free electricity out of it because they paid for the panels to get put up. We pay them a payment each month for electricity. It's kind of like we lease them from the city, from the utility company, SDG&E. But SDG&E is overproducing, so they're actually making out on it in the end. So Valhalla, we're paying for electricity, but we're paying a low price, a low fixed cost for our electricity. And this is showing you solar farms popping up. So how do they work? Well, they have two plates in them, all right? There's a plate on the top here and a plate on the bottom, all right? The plate on the top is called an N-type plate. The plate on the bottom is a P-type. P-type are enriched with this element called boron. N-type are enriched with phosphorus. What happens? Light strikes silicon. Silicon is a semiconductor, okay? So it conducts electricity. This is used in computer chips and solar plates, you name it, and electronics. So light strikes the solar panels. What does that do? It causes electrons to move from the boron-rich P-type to the phosphorus-rich N-type. So the movement of electrons are negatively charged. That movement of electrons is electrical. It's an electrical movement. All right. So then they attach wires to it, and then they use what's called inverters. All right. And inverters convert what's called direct current, which is the movement, into what's called alternating current. Well, why do they do that? Direct current is what solar panels produce, okay, and it's what's stored in batteries. Your digital devices in your house, they generally run on what's called alternating current, AC. So an inverter is a device. For example, my solar panels have an inverter, and that inverter converts the direct current that was made in my solar panels into alternating current that then gets put onto the grid. So if you see these terms DC and AC, direct current is what is made in your solar panel. Alternating current is what your appliances work on, basically. All right. And this is a picture of a solar farm. I already showed you that. Thin film solar cells, this is kind of the future. They're developing these really thin sheets that you can put on surfaces. What I mean by surfaces, they're talking down the road, like when countries and places really eventually shift towards renewable energy, putting them on streets, put them on everywhere, on roof shingles. So if you can put this thin film solar cells everywhere, you can pretty much produce electricity whenever sun is shining. They're a little less expensive, okay, than typical photovoltaic cells, but they're not quite as efficient, but they're a little less expensive. So you can utilize them in more places. Like I said, the goal is to put them everywhere, on streets, on buildings, you name it. What's happening nowadays, what a lot of people are doing, since a lot of people overproduce, and they're realizing here in the United States, they don't really pay you much. Like I overproduce electricity. We have this program called net metering here in the United States. What happens? Well, when I make excess electricity, and it happens in solar or wind, you put it back on the grid, and then the utilities keep track of how much electricity you give them. So that's why they call it net metering. Like, do you give them overall, do you give them more, do you draw more, or do you add to the meter more? Is what it comes down to. So are you adding to the meter, or are you drawing from the meter? If by the end of the year, if you've added more than you've withdrawn, they'll pay you for the electricity you've made. It doesn't pay that much. The feed-in tariffs in Germany paid market value. They paid people, pretty good money for what they were producing. Net metering pays you like pennies on the kilowatt hour you produce. Pennies. Like I overproduced one year quite a bit when I first put my solar panels in, and by the end of the year, it should have equated to like $1,000, over $1,000, and I got back like a couple $100. So the utilities companies are really taking advantage of us. They redo their contracts every so often, and when they redo their contracts, the new contracts are generally more benefiting to the utilities companies. So if you got solar panels, like for example, like I did, I got them pretty early. You were on the original net metering contract, and then you're grandfathered onto it. I'm lucky I got in right before it changed, because when it changed, the next net metering contract paid you less for excess production. So they almost create a program where it's not in your best interest to make extra, because you're not going to get paid much for it. And then the utility company is going to use it, and they're going to charge someone else a premium for that electricity. It's not really fair. With a feed-in tariff program, you would overproduce on purpose so that you can cover other costs, because having this thing on your roof would be making you money rather than paying you pennies on the dollar like the utilities companies currently do. So in our country, it's not even designed. People aren't even trying to overproduce, because there's no reason to for them, because they pay extra for panels, and then they don't get paid that much from the electric companies and the utility companies. Benefits of it, well, we're not going to run out of it in our lifetimes. It's inexhaustible and renewable. If we figure out how to harness it more efficiently, we won't need any other forms of energy, basically, on our planet. That's really if we figure out how to harness it. And the big issue is we haven't been developing the technology until the last like 20 to 30 years. Kind of, fossil fuels dominated that sector. And because they dominated the sector, they didn't want competition. So a lot of times the fossil fuel industry has purchased technology that was competing with them in other renewable sectors, and kind of threw it by the wayside, got rid of it. And that people talk about conspiracy theories, but that stuff does kind of happen. If the fossil fuel sector gets their hands on it, they can slow the rate of progress by a lot. And that absolutely happened in the electric car industry. The electric car industry was specifically influenced by the petroleum sector. They did not want the automobile sector developing electric cars. The electric cars weren't in their best interests, basically. There's a whole story of how General Motors was on the cutting edge of developing electric cars. Back in the 90s, General Motors had some of the first cars out. But if you even think of General Motors today, you don't even think twice about electric or even hybrids. General Motors is believed to have taken like a payout or of some sort from the petroleum industry to stop their development of their EV1 electric vehicle back in the 90s. It's interesting. There's a whole story about it. There's a movie about it called Who Killed the Electric Car? And General Motors, everyone loved it when they developed it back in the 90s, and then it just disappeared. Why did it disappear? Somebody paid them to make it disappear, and you have to figure out who did it. Think about solar energy. If you're using solar panels, no moving parts. They really don't need any maintenance. No fuel is needed. Okay, green jobs, already said, all these jobs related to maintaining and managing solar panels. A lot of electrician jobs are out there right now. It's not a bad field to go into. There's a lot of electrician jobs. No pollutants, no greenhouse gas, no air pollutants. Drawbacks of it, not everywhere has the same amount of sun. Solar radiation, look, there's more of it where we live, southwestern United States. But I mean, people don't realize in the northern part of our country, sure, they don't have a lot of sun all year, but they do get sun during certain parts of the year. And those parts of the year that they do get sun, they can still create solar power. Germans were overproducing, and look at Germany. Germany's on the low end of it. This is trying to show you that Germany was one of the leaders in the world. They are, I believe, the leader in the world per person for production of solar power is Germany right now. And look, Germany doesn't even have as much solar radiation as we do. So per person, Germany produces the most solar power renewably than any other place. And look, really, really low amounts of solar radiation. There is enough sun. That's how much sun comes through. Even on a cloudy day, you still produce electricity. Here's the thing about installations that are drawbacks to people. People don't want to pay money up front. But what most people do not understand, this is a huge one that you should go tell your parents if you're watching this video, is that if you put solar panels in, you generally do it with a loan, and then you have to pay off a loan. Your loan, for the most part, is usually lower than your electric bill each month. A lot of people do not know that. So it is a way of doing it. If you have good credit and you get approved on a loan, putting solar panels on your house and creating your own electricity will mean now you don't have an electric bill. You do have to pay a fee to be on the grid because that is a law and a rule, but you do not have to pay for electricity if you make enough for your needs. You just have to pay a fee to be on the grid, basically, each month. And that's a mandatory fee for everyone. Whether you're using any electricity or not, you're going to get a fee just to draw from the grid. So my tip to a lot of people is, it seems like there's a huge upfront cost, but there isn't here in the United States because of the loan programs we have. You generally pay a loan off. It takes between 10 and 20 years to pay your loan off. I did my loan in 12 years, and my solar panels are guaranteed and warranted for 25 years. So I will have 13 years of free electricity, basically, because I produce pretty much just about enough for my needs. So once they're paid off, I'm going to get about 13 years of electricity for free. Who is the current world leader in solar technology? It's China. And they're producing so much of the world's solar panels. And why? Because they're using a lot of them. And there are a lot of people. They know that they have to shift towards renewable energy because they have 3 times the people we have in our country. You got to think of it this way. Germany has 3 times the people we have, and the United States has about three times the people that Germany has. All right, and Germany is one of the cutting edge countries when it comes to renewable energy. The U.S. needs to be one of those countries. It's Germany and China, and it should be the U.S. This is what's sad about our country. The fossil fuel sector, the reason our country is so big on fossil fuels isn't because, we have all these cars that run it. No, it's because the fossil fuel industry lobbies and pays politicians to create laws and subsidize the fossil fuel industry and keep it afloat. It's all about a trading of money. It's about money moving. If the money goes out of their pockets, they don't like it. So the fossil fuel industry puts money, lobbies, and puts money into the campaigns of a lot of politicians. So these politicians push fossil fuel industry and fossil fuel usage. It happens all the time. If you're wondering which parties are more fossil fuel oriented, the Republicans, the GOP is pro fossil fuel. The liberals, the Democrats are pro renewable energy, not destroying the planet, not creating greenhouse emissions, not creating air pollutants. All right? And we'll stop there.